Good morning, class. So today we're going to talk about two topics, composite figures and also finding missing dimensions, both involving volume. Now, as we go through these problems, they may look familiar. I believe, are in your notes and homework from last week. So if you'd prefer to write on those papers for notes, but remember, if you can't print, you can always write on a sheet of paper. So composite figures. Composite means several parts. So when I say several parts, if I look at so-called number 7, it says Jack bought an automatic water bottle feeder for his cat, right up my alley. A diagram of the bottle is shown below. What is the maximum amount of water that the bottle can hold? So this figure here, I see multiple shapes. I don't see one figure. I see two in this case. So here, it's asking what's the maximum amount of water that this can hold for the bottle feeder for his cat. So I need to find the volume of not just one, but two shapes, because this is all going to fill up with water. So if I look at this, I will number them, but I see a shape here I'll call number 1, figure 1, and down here I see a second figure, number 2. So for the first one, number 1, I ask myself, okay, what shape is this? And I see, okay, it's a cylinder. So I want to then say, okay, volume for a cylinder. And I say, okay, what's the volume? What's the formula? It is pi r squared times the height. Okay, so we're just going to focus on finding this figure first before we find the total. Total meaning we add them together. So here, I have pi. We'll identify the radius, which will be squared, and we'll also put in place what the height is of the cylinder. So if I look at this cylinder, I do see right off the bat that the height of the cylinder is 8.5. So in place of h, I'll put 8.5. And then the radius. So here, I see that it's 6 inches, but it's going straight across. So that's the diameter. So if the diameter is 6, but I want the radius, I take half the diameter. So half of the diameter would be 3. So the radius of the cylinder is 3. Okay? So now I have everything I need to compute or calculate what the volume is. And what you get, I'm just going to do 3 squared times 8.5, and I get 76.5 pi. Now, again, I think I said this in the last video, you can use the pi button or use 3.14. I like to be a bit more precise, and I like to use pi. So I'm going to do, there it is, 76.5 times pi, and I get approximately 240.3. Let's see, we're in inches, so inches cubed. Okay, so that's the volume of the first one. Now, we still have a second figure to think about. And I ask myself, what's the shape? And I see it is a cone. So I need to find the volume of a cone. Now, the volume of a cone is pi r squared times the height, which is a cylinder. But if I take a third of a cylinder, I now have a cone. So now I have 1/3 pi, and since the diameter is 6 inches and it's parallel to the bottom right here, that means that the cone has a diameter of 6 as well, and therefore the radius is half the diameter, which gives us 3 again. Now, the height. If I look, this would be the height right here. But they don't give it to me, but we can find it. We have 12.5 inches. That's the entire height of the bottle feeder. And then earlier we said, okay, the cylinder is 8.5 inches. So to find the difference, I'm going to take 12.5 and then subtract 8.5 to get the height of the cylinder. And when you subtract these two, you would get 4. So if I add these together, if I add these two together, it should get me back to 12.5. So now I know the height of the cone. And so if I take 1/3 pi 3 squared times 4, I get, and I'm using the pi, so if you use 3.14, you're fine. I'm going to round to the tenths place, and I get approximately 37.7 inches cubed. Okay, so we broke this figure down into parts, but it says what's the maximum amount of water that it can hold? Well, that means I'm finding the total volume. So the total volume means that I add the volume of the first figure and I add the volume of the second figure. So I'm going to add 240.3, that was our first volume, plus the volume of the cone was 37.7. So the total volume, the maximum amount of water this can hold for his cat is well, hot diggity dog. That gives me a whole number of 278 inches cubed. So this is my final answer. We had to break this into parts before we could add them together to get the total. Okay? So what I would like you to do is, as you can see, I want you to try this next problem. Identify what shapes there are, break it down into shapes, and ask yourself if it is involved. Do they give me the diameter or the radius? And if they give me diameter, I need to find the radius. So pause this video and try out number 11. It's talking about Henry has a silo on their farm to store grain. So notice how this can apply to anything in the real world, and they need this to know how much max they can fill. Assuming the entire space is used, what is the maximum amount of grain that the silo can hold? So same idea with water in the cat feed or the bottle feeder for the cat. We're now applying it to the farm and how to store grain. So try this out and pause. I'm going to pause the video and then give it a whirl and we'll go over it. All right, now what we have here, I'm debating if I want to show you the answer key. I think I should go along with y'all just to make sure. Okay, but I'll let you know. Using pi, you'll get about 15,712.2 feet cubed. Okay, that would be your total volume. So if you had that, awesome. You can move forward to the next part we do. But for others, I'm going to break this down. So I see not just one, but two shapes. So for the first one, I have the volume of a hemisphere. And for a hemisphere, that is 2/3 pi r cubed. And then the second figure, excuse me, is a cylinder, like we dealt with before. And that formula is pi r squared times the height. So now I've got to identify the parts to plug in that we need. So here we have 2/3 pi, and we need the radius. So if I look at this hemisphere, it's like a bowl. This time, again, they give us the diameter. The 22 is in the center point, so that's the diameter. So if the diameter is 22, to get the radius, which is half the diameter, half of 22 is 11. Okay, and then we'll calculate that in a second. So now I go to this next part, the cylinder. The cylinder, we have pi, and since they're connected, see how the cylinder has parallel bases of circles, just like the hemisphere, we have a circle involved to get radius? The radius is the same. So the radius of the hemisphere is 11, and the radius of the cylinder is also 11. Now we just got to figure out the height. They give us the entire height of 45. Now by definition of radius, radius is the center to any point on the circle. So maybe I do it this way. So this length, we said the radius is 11. So I have 11 feet. So it goes back. If this is 45 and I subtract 11, I get the height of the cylinder. So if I take 45 minus 11, I get 34. And make sure I do 34 plus 11, which gets me back to 45 for the height of the whole composite figure. So in place of h, I know the cylinder is now 34. And when we put this in the calculator, let's see, 2662 divided by 3, 22 times pi. I get about, hold up, make sure I did that right. Yes, I did. It's 2,787.6 feet cubed. And now if I calculate the cylinder, let's see, we get big number, 12,924.5 feet cubed. But it's asking what's the maximum amount of grain it can hold. It's not just filling up in the cylinder, but also the hemisphere. So we need to add them together. So the total volume, we add both of the volumes together. So if I add these two numbers together, plus 2787.6, we get 15,712.1 feet cubed. Now notice how I rounded in these two parts. Maybe you had gotten 15,712.2 feet because you were being more exact when you were adding. Okay, I'll give a little leeway on that when we have a quiz, because we will probably have a short quiz in Illuminate next week. So just a little heads up. All right, so hopefully this went well. This is the final answer. So now let's move on to finding missing dimensions. This is where it goes backwards. They're going to give us the volume, and then we've got to solve for a variable. So it goes back to algebra. So here it says the volume of a rectangular prism is 655.2 feet cubed. If the base of the prism is 9 feet by 5.2 feet, find the height of the prism. So I ask myself, okay, it's a rectangular prism. What is the volume formula for that? Well, it's length times width times height. But they gave us the volume. The volume is 655.2. So I substitute in place of V, the volume, 655.2 equals, and they say, if the base of the prism is 9 feet by 5.2, find the height. So they're giving us the length, 5.2, and the width, 9. And you could have switched these because, again, remember, since we're multiplying all three together, it doesn't matter the order. But it says find the height, so I put h here. So now I have a variable to solve for. So if I multiply 5.2 times 9, I'm going to bring down my volume. If I multiply these together, I get 46.8, and I bring down the h. And then if it's 46.8 times h, to undo that to get h by itself, opposite of multiply, divide. And so my height, I find out that the height of this rectangular prism, when I divide these, we get 14 feet. Okay. Okay, so we are going backwards now. Instead of us finding volume, they're going to give it to us and tell us to find one of the variables in the volume formula. Let's try another one. If a cylinder has a height of 7 and the volume is 2,908.33 cubic inches, find its diameter. Okay. So we have a cylinder, and the volume formula for a cylinder is pi r squared times height. Again, they gave us volume, so I'm going to substitute that. And set that equal to pi. We're finding diameter. To find diameter, we first need to find the radius. And then it told us the height is 7 inches. So in place of h, I put 7. Okay, so what I can do is I could first divide by 7, and then I could divide by pi, or you could just divide 7 and pi at the same time. Now here's the key. If you divide 7 and pi on both sides at once, make sure in your calculator you do parentheses 7 pi. It makes a difference. It's about order of operations. So divide by 7 pi. If I divide those, these cancel, and I'm left with r squared, so I'm almost there. So I'm going to take the volume and divide it by 7 pi, and we get 132 point, to be a little more exact, I'll round to the hundredths. If you do tenths, that's fine, unless it tells you otherwise. So almost there. So I want the radius, not radius squared. Opposite of squaring? Square root. So if you take the square root of this number, you find that the radius is 11.5. But we're not done. It wants diameter. So to get diameter, we double the radius. So 11.5 times 2, or 11.5 plus 11.5, we get a diameter of 23 inches. This is my final answer. Okay? All right, now, let's see, I will do this one and then have you try a couple. Okay? So, next one. A cone has a volume of 1,309 cubic centimeters. If the height of the cone is 8, find its radius. Okay, so I have a cone. The formula for a cone is 1/3 of a cylinder, so 1/3 pi r squared times height. Okay, and then I'm going to once again substitute my volume, my V, for 1309, 1,309 equals 1/3 pi. I'm sorry if you hear a ping pong ball. My cat's having fun. Let's see, it tells me the height, find the radius. So I'm going to bring down the radius because that's what we got to find. And the height is 8. Okay. So there's different ways you can do this. How I do it, you may do it differently, get the same answer. Personally, the first thing I'd like to knock out is this annoying fraction. So if I take 1/3, or 1 divided by 3, well, what's the opposite of dividing by 3? Multiply. So if I multiply by 3 on both sides, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so these cancel. But what you do on one side, you do on the other. Okay? So if I do 3 times the volume, oops, calculator turned off. 3 times the volume, I get 3,927. And I'm going to bring down the pi, the r squared, and the 8. Almost there. Okay, so once again, you could divide by 8 first, then divide by pi next, or vice versa. But I like to knock it out in one. But make sure you do parentheses in your calculator. So I'm going to divide by 8 pi. So that way these cancel and I'm left with the radius. So the radius squared equals, so if I divide these, I get 156.25. Okay. And it wants the radius, so we don't have to double or anything to get diameter. Whatever we get for the radius is the final answer. So the opposite of squaring is to square root in order to get r by itself. And when you take the square root, you get 12.5 centimeters. Watch those labels. Okay? All right. So what I'd like you to do is now pause the video and try out 15 and 16. All right? Give those a try. Oh, wait a second. I just caught something. Make sure, this says surface area. We'll say it's volume. Glad I caught that. Yep, we're good. So cross out surface area for 15 and write volume. So they're giving you the volume. And then try those two out. Holler, knock it off. All right, so hopefully you paused and tried it. So for number 15, we have a rectangular prism. Well, the volume formula is length times width times height. The volume, which I changed surface area to volume, is 930. So I substitute. Let's see, they gave us the length of 12 feet. They gave us the width of 9. And then it tells me the keyword, I'm finding height, so I know I'm going to bring down h. That's what I got to find. So if we do 12 times 9, you get, bring down my volume, 108 times the height. And to get h by itself, we divide. So we find out that the height is about 8.6. What's our label? Feet. Okay? All right. Number 16, a cone. So I know we're dealing with the volume of a cone, which is 1/3 pi r squared height. Okay, a cone has a height of 15 yards and a volume of 475.17 cubic yards. Find the diameter of the cone. Okay, so I'm going to substitute. Volume, I'm told, is 475.17 equals 1/3 pi. We're finding diameter, so we've got to find the radius first to then find the diameter. And the height is 15, so in place of h, 15. All right, so if I multiply, since it's 1/3, 1 divided by 3, if I do the opposite and multiply by 3, that way my fraction goes away, but I've got to do it on both sides. So if I triple the volume, you get 1,425.51. And we have pi r squared times 15. So I personally like to divide and have one less step. So I'm going to divide by 15 pi on both sides. But make sure you put parentheses. So that way, what I'm left with is r squared. So when I divide these, I get 30.25. And of course, opposite of squaring, to undo, we do the square root. So we find that the radius is 5.5, but it wants diameter. So diameter, you double the radius, and you get 11 yards. That is your final answer. All right? So hopefully it went well. Okay? Your homework, which I'm going to show you really quick, but it is also in Google Classroom. Your homework is going to be the first sheet, actually the whole thing, is even problems only. So I have them, for me, it's in yellow, but when I scanned it, it is not showing. But do even problems on the front. It's like what we just did, finding missing dimensions. Okay? And then the next side is two problems involving composite figures, which we talked about at the beginning of this lesson. Okay, so that's a total of 10 problems due next week, and make sure you post it into Google Classroom. All right? If you need me, you know where to find me, you know when I'm available, and we will talk soon.